morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gannit Ankori, and I'm the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum, Professor of Fine Arts and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Brandeis University. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our land statement, which I hope everyone has had a chance to read and take in. Thank you. And thank you one and all for joining us for this evening's program, Artist on Artist, Lyle Ashton Harris and Renee Cox. This dialogue is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Lyle Ashton Harris, Our First and Last Love, which is currently on view at the Rose Art Museum through July 2nd. We hope you will have the opportunity to visit the museum and experience the power and poetics of this significant and moving show. You can also see Renee Cox's monumental Yo Mama on view now. It is one of the highlights of our permanent collection show. So now I have the great honor and pleasure of introducing our two extraordinary guests, Lyle Ashton Harris and Renee Cox. Welcome, Lyle and Renee. We are so excited and honored to host you here. So both Lyle and Renee are prolific, path-breaking artists and have created an impressive and profoundly meaningful body of work over the last 3 or even 4 decades. Their practice is rooted in photography, but has expanded beyond the photographic image to include complex installations, collages, videos, and other form of visual expression. Both Lyle and Renee explore their own multifaceted identities with both tenacity and veracity, but also with unbridled creativity and imagination. Both also examine broad political and social issues, focusing on race, ethnicity, gender, desire, and never afraid to break the mold or break taboos. Maybe they're afraid, but their art is fearless. I hope this evening's conversation will allow us to explore many of these issues, but before we begin, perhaps we can go back 35 years or so and start with your first encounter. Renee, perhaps you can share your first encounter with Lyle with us.
Hi. I just want to say hello to everybody and thank you for listening. My first encounter with Lyle. Yes, it happened when I was just back from Paris, which is probably about 19, like in the 80s there, the end of the 80s.
85.
85 to be exact.
It was 85, yes, the summer
Okay.
of 85.
Perfect. And you came to me at the recommendation of Gregory Gray, who was the art director at Essence Magazine. And I remember we went downstairs to the financial center and we had lunch, and Lyle was explaining to me about fine art and whatnot, because he had come down because I was doing fashion photography at the time and he was interested in that. And he showed me some stuff. I won't mention who the artist was, but he showed me some stuff and I looked at it and I was like, wow, that's it. I mean, I could shoot that with my eyes closed, basically. But also at the same time, I was going through a transitional period in my life. I had just had my first child and fashion wasn't really doing it for me anymore, in the sense that my photographs only had a 28-day lifespan. And I wanted them to have more than that. And that's when I got to thinking seriously about going back to school, getting my master's degree. And then I went on to the Whitney Independent Study Program, where Lyle was also in that same year as me, with Michael Richards and Dred Scott and others. So that was basically the first encounter.
So the first image that I found of the two of you together, I think it says circa mid-1990s. I think it's more like 92. But tell us about it, Lyle. This is from your famed Ektachrome archives.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Gannit, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. having our show premiere, at the Rose, and super excited about the reception. And it's wonderful that you organized this conversation between Renee. As you know, Renee and I have known each other from, we met, just my rendition is that I was an econ major at Wesleyan, and during the summer of '85, after returning from living in Europe visiting my brother there in Amsterdam specifically, I had an internship at Essence magazine, and I was supposed to be interning with the photo editor at the magazine, and very beautiful woman, but unfortunately was tragically homophobic. So the art director, Gregory Gray, legendary art director, formerly of Essence, and then went on to Marie Claire and then several other European publications. He took me under his wing. And in one of those hot summer air-conditioned summer days, that this apparition walked in, and it was Renee Cox, who had blonde, brown dreads, tresses down to locks, tresses, combination down, and with faded blue jeans, and I was totally in awe. So that was our first encounter. So, and then she invited me down, as she mentioned, to have lunch, and then we soon became fast, close friends, and we both, as she mentioned, wind up at the Whitney together with our dear friends Dred Scott and the late Michael Richards, as you know, who passed away during 9/11, and who is having a major comeback with his work. So we're all grateful to Alex Fayola for that. But getting back to the Ektachrome archive, this photograph right here is when Renee, my brother, filmmaker Thomas Allen Harris, traveled to Mexico. I was living in the West Coast at the time, and my brother was also in the West Coast. I believe he was at UCSD, but he might have been visiting at that time. I'm not sure if he had moved out there yet to take this tenure position. But Renee came out to visit, and I think it took like a 10-day drive down to Mexico, and had an amazing time.
Yeah, I rented a car and whatnot, and I was like, okay, let's go over the border. Immediately got stopped by the police, had to bribe them to keep moving, and went to a lobster place in Ensenada is what I remember.
Oh yeah, that was delicious. And the lobsters there, they're small. They're more like, they're smaller, not the
like langoustine.
Yes, precisely.
So a lot of fond memories, and you kept in touch. And the next photograph that brings the two of you together that I found that I thought was really incredible is part of a series where you shoot from the front face and the back. And this is Renee in 1998.
Yes, it's part of a larger project called the excessive exposure that I began, I believe, in '98. So Renee was one of the first subjects. She was, in fact, subject number 14 out of 200 that was later published by Gregory R. Miller in 2010. In fact, this particular portrait of Renee will be featured in an upcoming show at the Guggenheim this coming fall in Ashley James's exhibition there on Blackness and Figuration and the abstract. Anyway, but I think it's important to somehow say that on occasion, Renee and I, in our own individual dive, if you will, into the archive, have come across photographs we've taken of each other, or let's see, together. So whether this photograph, anything we'll see in this PowerPoint is barely a touch of the documentation that she and I actually have. And that would make for a very interesting exhibition, or as well as a book that talk about how friends, because the Ektachrome archive, clearly there were a few that were published of she and I, or my photographs of her, but she has a whole trove of photographs of me that are not part of this PowerPoint, but that would make for a very interesting lecture one day. You know, we should think about that one day to have.
No, absolutely.
Would
And I
that
think,
be fun?
I think it would be good too for the, to the youth as well,
Absolutely, absolutely.
in terms of establishing, friendships early on and whatnot. And, people that you can, sort of confide in and bounce ideas off, throughout a lifetime.
Absolutely. And also the fact that, throughout a lifetime, and also to deal with the relationships go through, ebb and flow, but the fact that it's what a blessing to be right now in our 50s.
Yes.
I love it.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
To be able to to be in communion, and to be able to have weathered, multiple locations, both of us are, as Naomi said at the Guggenheim, they had an introduction in terms of being global citizens. Renee and I traveled extensively, and just to be able to have had that early formation in terms of relationships and connections, that
Right.
photographs here and the projects are the formal exploration of our own individual trajectories, but it's also this interconnected tissue in a way that's partly photography can accommodate for that, but there is something about the level of intimacy and connection, that in a way.
Absolutely. You don't get a good photograph, I think, unless you have that going on, first.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get something that's like very on the surface, superficial.
Right. Well, I think that you heard it here first, folks. There is another project in the offing.
It works.
And I have to say, when I was little and you heard about, let's say, Paris in the 20s or 30s, where you had all those artists knowing each other and poets, etc. I look at the Ektachrome archives and I think, oh my God, they knew Bell Hooks. Oh my God, they knew Isaac Julian. Oh, they were friends, and they knew Essex. And and then I see a photograph of someone who I didn't even think was part of this group. Oh, Catherine Opie is there too, and Nan Golden. So I think that friendship, you always have these thinking about the artist as an individual who may be competitive, but these networks of friends who really supported each other. And the other thing I want, in one quote, you said that there's something about the archive that's sort of like a memento mori, because it overlapped with the AIDS crisis, and a lot of the people are no longer with us. And these photographs bring them to life, and we remember them and their contributions.
Yeah, I'll just sort of just say, and thank you for that. And I would say not only the Paris of the 20s and 30s, but also the Harlem Renaissance or the Weimar period, or thinking about independence, West Africa, if you think about, in the wake of the Ghanaian Nkrumah leading independence movement, the fact that there were whether that Lumumba, people coming together. So there are all these clusters that happen in different locations around the world. And I think it's important, to Renee's point, the fact that it's about those spheres of intimacy, connecting, but also about political agency. Just thinking about the four of us, Renee, Dred Scott, and the late Michael Richards, when we wanted to bring Greg Tate, now who's the late Greg Tate, deeply, highly revered, when he was delivering the discussion at the Whitney on the occasion of the Basquiat opening, correct me if I'm wrong, Renee, that we invited him, we wanted to invite him to the Whitney ISP program at that time. And so I think it's important to understand that the four of us went out to Renee, with one of Renee's favorite haunts, what is it called? The Lucky Strike.
Right.
And, and this is sort of like strategizing how we're going to get him to come, because he at that time was not one who was part of the, let's just say the
Whitney crowd. He
Whitney crowd.
wasn't validated by Ron. However, he had an essay in the Basquiat book.
Yes. So it's just sort of like thinking about, so it's not just in terms of people coming together in terms of intimacy, that's true, but it's also how people come together to for creativity, but also somehow to your point before, for political agency and finding a way to somehow come together as a group and unity to be able to advocate for what we want in a way. And I think to Renee's point that this younger generation doesn't understand that level of agency of coming together. So when you mention in terms of different people from different walks of life, whether that's, us or people like Belle or, Kathy Opie, the fact that even if everyone wasn't close tight, there were spheres of influences where people understood the urgency. So it wasn't, let's say, that people understand that there was a sense that there was multiple cultures in formation. And the fact that
there wasn't also sorry, not to cut you off, but the level of competition and whatnot that I think younger artists experience today. Because now it's very much a very monetary situation. For us back then, I mean, obviously you wanted to make some sort of living, but that wasn't the driving force. The driving force was really what you wanted to put out there in the public for discourse. And in order to change, in order to change people's views and whatnot. So that was the thing. Whereas now it's all about, oh, what brands are you with? And this, that, and the next thing. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah.
It is very different. I mean, and I respect this next generation for the agency to do that. I mean, who doesn't want a little extra cash? We all do.
Oh no, but, absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's all great, but I think it's also important to Renee's point is not to have amnesia about what was at stake, because things can, we're old enough to know how things can pivot. You know what I mean?
Right.
And really, I mean, our job, for Renee and I and you, Gannit, in terms of as academics and as elders, as artists, is for me to speak to a younger generation, say, realize, it's important to celebrate, but also to be thinking about when maybe the light is not in your direction. How do you still make work? How do you still survive? How do you still thrive? And to have a fulfilled life.
So I thought here, why don't you start, Renee? Start us off.
Let me just sort of say that I was not, when I came for the install, I didn't know this was there, so I was so happy, and I took a shot immediately, and I sent it to Renee, and then I connected the three of us together. So it's such a beautiful thing to have that. It's so beautifully situated. It's a powerful work. So it'd be wonderful just to hear about this work. Yes, I would like to hear. Tell us about this.
Well, yeah, it comes out of motherhood, and also being the first woman at the Whitney Independent Study Program to dare to be pregnant in it. And at that juncture, I felt, for me, it was like a call and response. I feel like a lot of my work is autobiographical to a certain degree, but it's also a response to how people are perceiving things. So when I was pregnant, I go into the Whitney program and I say, hey, I'm pregnant, expecting, oh, congratulations, and so on and so forth. But what I got was, are you sure? Can you get rid of it? And I'm like looking at these people like they're crazy, because this is my second child that I'm having. And I'm like, wow, I came out of fashion where people are, a little bit, superficial maybe, but nobody prevented me from working or anything. People would just simply joke, like, please don't break your water on our shoot. And now I was in this situation where people were like, can you continue on? Women artists who have children, I mean, they're not taken seriously. And at the same time, there was a magazine called Meanings, and Mila Shore had an article in there, and I think it was called Motherhood, Apple Pie, and Being an Artist. And basically she had interviews from, I think, 10 women. And these women were basically saying, women artists were like, yeah, no, we got to hide the children when the curator comes over. We got to make sure we put away all the toys and stuff. And I was just like, what the hell? I mean, it's like women, like we're the givers of life, we should be on a pedestal, worship like it was back in the old times, of humankind, where it was about the goddess. And I was like, oh, I have to do something about this. And that's when I started creating this image and other images around pregnancy and motherhood.
There's a famous sculpture of you pregnant.
Right.
There's
Yeah,
a
when I
famous
was
one.
7.5 months pregnant.
Yeah. And we also have the quote, that the empowerment, the self-empowerment that this image projects. And, no apologies here. This is me, and here I am, 7 feet tall, larger than life. And I think that when our students come in, it really inspires them and it really empowers them. So self-empowerment can really have influence.
So self-love too.
Right.
I think this is a very important factor because, especially being a Black female, I think it's the perception is that I'm not supposed to have self-love and that somehow I should be, I don't know, like hurt, saying to myself, I lack something. And I never, ever felt that at one point in my life. I've always felt that I've loved myself and enjoyed myself, meaning like I can be alone and still be fine with that. And I think that's important as well. And I think it's like it liberates other people, other women to say, hey, I can do the same thing.
Right. And I also read that you were very much aware of the Madonna and Child, the religious imagery that you were subverting in a way, but also adapting. So,
but I want to also say this photograph for me not just speaks to the history of art, but also in 2023, the disproportionate amount of brown skin, Black women, Caribbean, etc., or African who are nursing babies in New York City right now. So there is a question of class. There's a whole set of issues that are going on. And we have to talk about to what extent not only this image might speak to your students, but also be curious to see this image, let's say, in Washington Square, or on 8th and 5th as a billboard, and how that could telegraph another certain sense of agency, if that makes any sense. Because there is that unspoken stuff as well that still lingers on from antebellum, etc. So I want to just sort of say that. And not disparaging that as a profession, that's valuable as well, but I want to just talk about the unspoken stuff that's assumed in the context of our society.
Let me just say about this work that it also hangs in close proximity with Betty Saar's In the Shadow of Love, where you see a photograph of an African-American woman caring for white children. So that history is there.
Right.
And
with this image, I mean, from the personal side, that's my child, and he is biracial.
Yes.
Yeah. So
he's biracial.
FYI.
Yeah, he's biracial.
Yeah.
He's African. He's also
Right.
now he's French. He's African French. He's global, as Irma said a few days ago. And he's also he's one of the mega execs at Island Records as well, correct?
Right. He's now 34 and he's the manager of Shawn Mendes.
Yeah. So
yeah. I applaud you as a mother, but also I just want you to see that great works of art have a life, first of all, they're like archaeological sites. There's so many layers that you need to estimate. It's not just one meaning, but also it continues to resonate in different ways throughout. Right. So we love having this image here. It's also about family. And I was thinking about mother and sons. as something very interesting. Also, not just the mother and child, but we actually had the opportunity to meet your mother, Lyle, and
Yes,
Thomas.
yes.
So thinking about this, here I want to maybe stress, for lack of time, that this is one of the Polaroids where you add the Pan-African, the colors of the Pan-African
Yes,
flag.
the UNIA flag that was accepted by the official colors flag for the Black race. So this is and this, yeah, so you want to continue?
It's Last Supper, right, done, was shown in the Brooklyn Museum in 2001, created a huge scandal with our dear friend Mayor Giuliani and the Catholic League. And my interpretation, I mean, I grew up as Catholic, went to Catholic school. I was told that we were all created in the likeness of God. So hence I decided to take on that role and do the racism in this country. It created a huge stir and like worldwide news. And for me, it's merely the fact that I am a Black woman who chose to sit at the center, or stand rather at the center of that table. I think that was the thing that aggravated people the most, that they didn't want to talk about that part of the story.
Right, and also take a religion and interpret it in the way that makes meaning for you.
Right.
I thought that this is also a controversial and provocative work. It's hanging now at the Rose, and the reason I brought it here, it's family, it's brotherhood. But in one of the interviews, Lyle, you talked about Cain and Abel. You talked about the doubting Thomas, and of course the gun, and a gun pressed against brown skin is something that's too hard for many of us to even look at. But then also breaking taboos. I mean, Renee, you as the naked Christ woman in the Last Supper, and here two brothers who are both loving brothers, but also with this animosity. Lyle?
Yeah, there's a wonderful editorial by the great Alice Walker that I guess loosely inspired this. It was an editorial in the New York Times several years ago, probably 93. It was 93, where she spoke about the David Hillard and another Black Panthers and the complexity of how it's much easier for a man, and she was talking in that case, an African-American man, a Black man, a man of African descent. It's probably more familiar to, because of the shared history of trauma, to maybe annihilate another as opposed to really fully embrace the love, the mirroring, if you will. So I think the photograph in a way teases on some of that, but clearly, as you mentioned, there's biblical Cain and Abel. Also, if you think about the UNIA flag, the way in which that was narrated in the 70s in a very masculinist or heteronormative reading, that I wanted to give the flag, if you will, elasticity to sort of open up, the space. And the photograph, as you know, has been subject of many dissertations from Cambridge to Yale or where have you. But it's interesting how it's been in major, many shows. And I'm curious from your perspective, Gannit, how has it been received in the context of the students seeing it?
Well, I don't want to take too much time when we have you and Renee here, but I would say that it's one of the most difficult one for them to perceive. And, we were kind of doing a training when they say, oh, it's provocative. And we say, what do you find provocative? And some go for the taboo of incest. And others just can't stand the idea of the gun. in today's world. I mean, there's so many guns and there's so many Black bodies that are the victims of these guns. So it goes in many different directions, but people are also
I would
very
say that's
attracted to it.
That's the power of art in terms of, let's say, to almost to distill and to somehow to bring multiple things into one concentration. So the uncomfortableness is the anxiety, and the question is, how does one handle that level of anxiety or uncomfortableness?
Yeah. So this one, you know, in Yo Mama and in the Last Supper, Renee kind of interrogates Black womanhood. And in your work, a lot has to do with various forms of masculinity and
gender and sexuality.
and gender.
Yes.
With this, because of a mutual friend of ours, IK Day, who had a magazine called A Rude. And in A Rude, I took on the persona of a man, and not for any like sort of gender, whatever, switching or anything like that, just to be able to see what it was like and how I would be received, say, in a heterosexual strip club and also a gay bar, but like a bar where they have like little rooms and there are people having sex acts in these little rooms.
So did you go into the spaces and drag?
Yeah, I did actually.
How was it?
Really funny because in the heterosexual places, I was sort of able to get away with it a bit, because what I realized, heterosexual men, there's sort of like an unwritten rule that they're not really supposed to look at other men, right? So they just kind of glance over, and if that's what they see, then they're like, okay, fine, it's a man. They're not going for the details. In the gay club that I went to, it was funny because I was with a friend of mine who was Latino, so he understood. And in Spanish, these two Latino guys passed me, and they said in Spanish, "Oh, that's not a man. That's a woman." So they spooked me.
I never knew that. I never knew that. How funny.
Yeah, I mean, right away they knew that I was not a man and that I was a woman. And with this, I mean, this is also too, we have to mention, you had access to the Polaroid 20x24 camera, which was very alluring and seductive. So it was like, hey, what can we do? You know what I'm saying? And then I had this idea, because the mustache and a little goatee, that's coming from the other, you know, investigation that I made. And then my son Tosh, my youngest, who's now 29, he was, as you can see, recently born. So brought him into it. And that's another thing I would say to women artists: look, incorporate your children in the work too. Don't, you know, push them off to the side.
I can just say, Renee, that you're a handsome man. And I can say to Lyle that my team here, everyone said that you look like your mother.
Yeah.
But this idea of gender bending, this idea of being another, embodying someone else, the fluidity and the freedom to do so is especially important. And I think today, when people try to ban the creativity that is drag, it's even more important to kind of display this freedom and this ability to empathize with the other, to see the self as other. And that's what I wanted to move to family, not this invented family, but your real roots. And there are two, I'll show both of them. One is Succession, which is now part of the Rose collection, where we begin with a photograph taken by Lyle's grandfather of Lyle's father, Lyle, and his brother Thomas, but also elements that relate to other personas that respond to different desires or forms of identity. And parallel to that, I brought 4 images from Renee's, or four clusters of images from Renee's American Family, which have the archive images, the original photographs of grandfather, mom and dad, Holy Communion, and the good little Catholic girl, which explained to me why you were using these Catholic images. But they are bracketed by these, I think, self-portraits that relate to desire and sexuality.
And freedom too.
Which
freedom, yeah. Which is that was really important to me. And I mean, with American Family, one, I would say it was a little bit of a midlife crisis, if you want. But the other side of it, relating to these pictures, were the freedom to be able to do that, because my parents were obviously Jamaican. And I know that they would have said to me, you know, well, I can't understand. We've spent all this money on your education and whatnot. And the only thing you could come up to do is to just show your behind all over the place. So they had both passed away before I did this, actually. So I didn't have to deal with that sort of response, but I know that's the response I would have gotten from them. And I just wanted to show that what you're talking about, the freedom, the idea that you can do what you want to do, you know what I'm saying? And
right.
Yeah.
And I think the way that both of you use your own bodies is maybe different from Mary Kelly, whose work, the postpartum document, is very conceptual.
She never showed anything. She only showed the diaper.
Right.
Well, it's conceptually, deeply conceptually rich, which my work ranges from the conceptual to more figurative. So I think, I don't think it makes sense to really compare in that type of sense. But going back to the previous one on succession, and Gannit, you made a distinction between the families and the invented families versus, let's say, the biological. Is that what you were saying?
Well,
No, about the one of the three of us.
The one of the three of you is
I would say
an image of a family.
I would say that I don't necessarily see them as so split down the middle. I would say that, again, for me, photography, let's say, is in a way, I don't know, an embodiment of the essence inside. So I don't necessarily somehow see that the idea of the invented family, the biological, I think, in a way, or that within the self, even the same image succession right here, which draws on my grandfather's archive, let's say, of my grandfather, as you know, shot over 10,000 slides, from the late 40s to for at least four decades, documenting his friends and family. And this is an image of, let's say, my father and my brother and I. But within that cluster of images, there's an outtake of of a still from Marlon Riggs's film posthumous release, Black is Black 8. That's a figure of me in the mirror. Or the image in the upper left was a commissioned portrait for the New York Times magazine there were 5 of us: Chuck Close, Marilyn Martin, Nat Golden, and Robert Frank, the late Robert Frank, who were commissioned to do self-portrait in anticipation of the election year in 2000. So I would say that I mean, without getting too theoretical, I would say that one could find me, if you will, in all of them, whether the fictive or the imagined or the document, in a certain sense that one could even interrogate, let's say, the idea of the document, if you will. I do remember that young child who was on my father's lap, then meaning me, that when I was dropped off in Mauritania in 79, and at the age of 12 years old, when my mother went on to South Africa to see her in-laws, and I was staying with her best friend in Mauritania for a month, that there was a young man who couldn't identify me. And I was, 12, and his way of being able to verify what gender I was to feel my testicles. So Now, this was not in makeup or hair pulled back or in a constructed image, but the essence that may have eventually arrived in those constructed images was there, if that makes any sense. So I think the photographs, to my point, is not just somehow performing gender, if you will, or constructing, but in a way becomes sort of an essence or a manifestation of maybe some other forms of fluid energy that may exist within the self. So I just want to sort of say that.
So that's a great segue to the next, and I'm going to show several because our time is short.
Great. Let's just, yeah.
This is Renee's own version of herself as the so-called Hottentot Venus.
Right.
And again, embodying the other, I use the term radical empathy. So thinking about the other as self, not so becoming the other. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this, and then we'll move on because we have a lot more.
Okay, the most important thing for me with this was about the gaze. And I found this accoutrement in actually a costume store. And at the time I was sharing a studio with Lyle. So I came back and I was like, hey, look at the stuff that I found. And then the collaboration came about because Lyle had access again to the 20 by 24, Polaroid studio. So I said, okay, fine, let's do that there. And then I went back like right afterwards and, did my own version of it as well. So hence the two different versions of that.
Right.
And I did mine black and white. Huh?
Yeah, precisely. And I would just sort of say, again, going back to the Good Life series, which was trying to expand the notion of the idea of the nation, if you will. So whether that were portraits of my grandparents or portraits of my brother and I, or portraits collaboration with Renee Cox and Venus Hottentot, or say Michael Stewart, it's the idea of the pantheon, if you will. So,
right.
And then also the idea of the body in excess. Also looking at the idea, how do you take these historical figures, if you will, and to what Renee and I've done in the Venus Hottentot 2000, or in my case, the same Michael Stewart, or any of those images, to reinvest a certain life force into trauma, if you will, if that makes any sense. In the case of, let's say Michael Stewart, for example, as you know, he was killed, by New York's finest, and he did have an obituary, and that sort of his death ignited, one would say, the early resistance to the AIDS crisis in terms of the AIDS village. I mean, the important show that happened at the Guggenheim Museum last year. So I think it's part of this energy in terms of getting back to the Venus Hottentot, in terms of collaboration with Renee, is really trying to look at the trauma, not only of Saartjie Baartman, but also the construction of Black female otherness, and what does it mean for Renee to somehow to take on of, as opposed to saying this is just a critique of that, because I think it's very much easy to say, oh, this is a bad thing, but we also have to talk about issues of ambivalence. We think about the idea of like Tiki Smith in terms of like, or Grace Jones, how they have engaged, as opposed to like, well, these are bad representations.
Sorry, that was John Paul Gould.
Yeah, they have actually engaged with the idea of the Black erotic or Black beauty. And so it's a much more complicated thing. For example, when the same Michael Stewart, for example, was shown for the first time in '94 alongside of Venus Hottentot, people just assumed it was, let's say, a female officer. So, but it's complicated even to today. What does it mean? What's going on in these images? What's being asked of us? Similar, like your students, when they encounter, let's say, brother crossers, et cetera, 25 years later or more than that what is that uneasiness is less about the work, is it what is it eliciting in, what is it getting elicited in them? And in a lot of ways, I mean, for all of the freedom, if you will, that Instagram promises, or post-internet generation, they're actually quite bifurcated in terms that they're split off in terms of there's the element of, let's say, amnesia, not to mention, let's say, anorexia, the fact that all this gesture towards sexuality, freedom, etc. But in terms of being embodied, I think there's a post-internet generation of kids who are actually wanting that back in a certain sense, realizing that they have been robbed of that essence. So I think these images, in a way, begin to somehow reintroduce the body, if that makes any sense, and not from this recent fab of figuration, but to really go back to how this image are, as you said, we said before, in relationship to, Renee's, your mom, in terms of thinking about history, not to critique Madonna and child, but to reimagine what that might mean for today, if that makes any sense.
So I want to go back to what Renee said about the gaze here. So we do have someone who was the victim of colonization, but there is from Renee.
We all have been.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Still are.
Yes.
Still are. Colonialism just morphed into different things. Yes. But this woman, excuse me, Renee?
I just said into commonwealths.
Yes.
Commonwealth.
Right. But the gaze here is the empowered gaze. It's the same gaze that you had in your mama. Right.
It's also
the same gaze that I have throughout most of my work.
So I want to,
we're always looked upon as, the Black body, when the impression is that I'm there for the other's pleasure. But my take on it is, you can look at me, but I'm looking right back at you. You have no agency, no ownership over me in terms of my thinking or how I'm going to perform. This is all me. So there's for me, there's like a certain level of equality, if you want, is what I'm trying to sort of achieve. Because in a lot of photographs, you'll notice, even Cindy Sherman, she never looks into the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find striking about this work is the fact, in actuality, we can own the complexity of our sexuality and the unfinished business of desire and pleasure and strength. In fact, I think that's going on, and to underscore Renee's point, but also to do it on our own terms. So it's not, that's where it gets rich and fertile, because it's not that the images of somehow saying that we cannot have desire or to be or pleasure or being fleshed, but the fact that there is the gaze that actually one is caught in the act of looking, to paraphrase Stuart Hall, that is that erotic moment caught within the gaze, if that makes any sense, as opposed to a much more Victorian or post-Victorian way of, let's say, shielding that, the fact that we can reintroduce desire.
Well, the thing was, because Hottentot, she was looked upon. She was
violated, you know what I'm saying? Tortured.
All over Europe, exactly. And they were made to look at her and ridicule her and so on and so forth. So that was the important thing was, and is throughout all of my work, is to have that gaze. And as I said, absolutely. I like to call it that ownership. Yeah.
Right.
Also sort of creating my own propaganda, if you want, of how
talk about it. Talk about it. So from rehabilitating or giving agency to a historical figure, to Saartjie Baartman, here you actually are a superhero.
Right.
I don't know if it's intentional to have those burning crosses reference.
Very intentional. Very intentional, because at that time there was a lot of church burnings going on down south. There have been a lot of communities, the Black Wall Streets. For instance, there were 120 of them across this nation at one point in time. They were all basically eradicated. So it was important for me to sort of say, okay, enough, stop. Rajay is here, because her mission, in terms of what I was talking about with the new propaganda of sorts, was to go out and sort of stop this racism and, have people change their mind about their misconceived conceptions of Black and brown people.
Right. So
I wanted to root it in Wonder Woman so that it had a sort of little comic book historical line as well. Because back in the 1960s, the creator of Wonder Woman created Nubia, she appeared on a couple of covers when Black was beautiful in the 1960s, when you would see Black is beautiful on the side of a bus as part of an advertisement by Alter Sheen. So I also wanted to encompass that as well.
I
And
didn't
again,
know, that's fantastic.
right. And again, to give the power. I mean, the Rajay series came out of the fact that I was at a Toys R Us and I'm like fighting with people for Power Rangers for my kids. And I go, wait a minute, there are no Black like superheroes. Like, what's going on with this? And I remember shooting one for Essence magazine called Sunman. But nothing ever happened with that. You didn't see any toys, you didn't see any animated series. And I was like, wait, I've got to do something about this. And that's when I decided to make this intervention of this image and the liberation of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben from their boxes and, so on and so forth. So it was important to me that, I mean, at least I feel like little Black girls could come in and look at that and go, wow, I could be a superhero too.
right.
And that's extraordinarily empowering for them to think that, because, it's what, only last year they could become a mermaid, right?
So Renee talked, if we could just talk a little bit more about a few more works that you did. And it's all about empowering Black women. This one is a kind of fictional character, but then we have Redcoat. Can you tell us a little bit about who you're embodying here?
Well, this is about Queen Nanny of the Maroons. Queen Nanny is the only female national hero in Jamaica. And she led and won guerrilla warfare with the British back in the 1700s. And the people actually still live on the stolen lands that the British took, but the Maroons negotiated to get it back. And they run their own little sovereign community in Portland right now to this day. And it's a history. I mean, it's told in Jamaica, but it's not very widely known. And I became extraordinarily fascinated with it. And in the shooting of this work, there's about 26 images in total, I mean, which was shot over a 2-year period. And one of the things I mentioned to students is that with this kind of work, you really have to develop a relationship with the people. It's not a matter, you don't just walk in there with your camera and start shooting, because you won't get it anyway, because you won't have the cooperation of the people. And the people were extraordinarily generous with me. They lent me their children, their homes and everything in order for me to be able to do this national hero, right? And to sort of provide some sort of fictional visual, because obviously there were no cameras back in the 1700s, so we don't know exactly what she looked like, but my interpretation, because she was a freedom fighter and she fought for it. And I can relate to that 110%. So why she's wearing the red coat is because she defeated the British. And one of the biggest insults that you can do is, after you beat somebody, is to don their uniform. And she has her machete, because basically she defeated them in that manner. Her warriors in Jamaica, we invented camouflage, okay? She had her warriors dressed in the cuckoo tree. And when you're fighting in a rainforest, the path is it's very small, right? And so they'd have to walk through single file with soldiers, and she would leave 1 or 2 soldiers at the end of this procession alive, so that they could go back to their regiment and say that, oh my God, everybody got killed by the trees. And this is before the Wizard of Oz, right? So it was like, wow, how could that be possible? But she put the fear of whomever, God, in these people, and they could not defeat her at all. So that's why she's wearing the red coat, because she's triumphant,
Right.
squashing them, basically.
Right.
So it comes out of that. But again, the thing, like, I mean, overall with my work, my art, I'm not interested in creating any kind of victimhood or anything for any of my sort of characters. They all are powerful in their own right. And I think that's important because within the Black community, I would venture to say to you, we have like 0 to none. We don't have any PR department, okay? So our PR is really bad. And I feel like it's something that I certainly don't need to add to that. I feel I need to make images that are empowering, you know, whether they're like obvious or if they're subtle, but it's always about the empowerment. And that's why I go back to the gaze again. I'm always looking straight into the camera. I'm looking straight back at you.
Right, right. That power. I mean, that's your superpower, isn't it? Visuality.
Right.
Empowering from Yo Mama, which is the first work we saw, that's right behind me,
Mhm.
through allowing the so-called Venus Hottentot to have agency, and creating superheroes and making the past heroines also into superheroes.
Right.
So I was thinking about the way both you and Lyle take the odalisque, you take Olympia by Manet specifically, and then redo them
Right.
literally in your own image.
Yeah.
Lyle,
That's because it's like it was always missing. When I was at an undergrad, I studied with Syracuse. I studied at Syracuse University, and I did the semester abroad in Florence. And you know, I was being shown Uffizi and all these other places. You know, all this great art, right? But I never saw anybody that looked like me, except for the occasional Black Moor. But that was it. And then I was like, wait a second, okay, this is supposed to be so great. Why don't I flip the script on it? And
right,
I think, I mean, and I know for sure, because I mean, I'm older than Kehinde. I mean, he took a note from that as well, you know, to go into these European, paintings and to like literally just flip it, and then obviously adding your own touch. I mean, I wasn't going to have the prostitute bringing me the flowers in Olympia. I extracted her, and she's in another piece where you just see my torso with my breast and the flowers, called American Beauty. And then this one, I decided to actually add my children in as my sort of, protectors, or, whatever you want to call
right.
them.
And you make them
That was my
Oriental, you're spoofing Orientalism as well, the way
Mhm.
Europe looks at all the others.
Right.
But still, I think what's beautiful is this insistence on not just visual pleasure, but pleasure in the body.
Right. Right. I mean, I like to think of them as being visually seductive. That's the other thing. Because I think also, in order to bring people in, you have to give them something to look at, right? You have to give them something that's like, wow, okay. And this is a huge piece. This is about 13 feet. Okay. It's like 3 panels. It takes up an entire wall. And another thing I like to play with is scale as well. Because what I've noticed, especially when I was living in Europe, the scale that people would use for their paintings, or even in their homes for that matter, of their ancestors, right? Standing there with the rifle and the pheasant at their feet, and the dog, and the tweed and the fireplace, and this whole image of land ownership, okay? Generational wealth that you don't necessarily see that when you go into a Black person's homes. Usually, if they're of upper middle class, they'll have a piano, and then on the piano, they will have silver framed photographs of their, family and whatnot. But they usually don't exceed 11 by 14. And even that, I think, may be a little bit big. So I decided to do, to go the other way. And it was just like, no, you're going to see these images just the same way that they were sort of presented to me when I lived in Europe. And I think that makes an impact. It makes an impact on the level of entitlement one feels and what one can accomplish, I think psychologically, on your children. So that was another reason why I like to use the scale. And I'm glad I remembered to mention that, because when you see it like this, it could be an 8x10 photograph.
Right.
So
Right.
that way.
So the last work that I thought we would discuss, because you kind of brought it up, a lot of these works relate to personal, community, social identity, but this one is specifically with Donald Trump's election. You were redoing the signing that's based on
Christie's painting.
Christie's painting, the scene of signing the Constitution. That's
Exactly.
from the beginning of the 20th century, and you made it
My version.
amazing. So it's subversion and actually taking power, right? Taking
Exactly.
agency.
Exactly. Always, always. I mean, I will say that, I mean, when I did this, I had sort of moved away from this, what do you want to call it? Like sort of the strategy, and got more interested in fractals and sacred geometry. But when Trump got in there, I was like, oh, wow, okay, now I've got to go back. I've got to do something that sort of speaks to that, because we are living in dire times now, and we're living in times that's allowing all of this nastiness of racism and sort of inequality to rear its little head up, because they're so angry that Obama was in there for, 2 terms. And that's when I decided to do this and, restage the entire thing with Black and brown people. And I mean, I've even included my sons in it, as well. The one like that's below the guy with the disc on his head on the right hand side of the screen, all the way over, right there, right where you're circling. That's one of my sons. And the other one is on the other side, on the left-hand side, in between the 2 tricorn hats. And the upper row, I don't see your little arrow. Right there, stop. No, there, that one. No, the one with the white wig there. That's the other one. So I was able to incorporate them into it as well. So, it's pretty consistent.
Right.
From babyhood to manhood. But
And this also kind of, I think we see the benefit of your being a fashion photographer.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing. It's like, I go like, I don't know, kids. I mean, I don't know. I can't blame the kids. You have to blame the adults, because they don't want to teach like the technical anymore. And I think the technical is, it's very important, because if you don't have that, you certainly can't have images that are visually seductive that people want to actually look at. You know what I'm saying? And that's so elementary that I think it needs to be taught. I mean, from a technical side, this is shot in 3 pieces, basically, and then all brought back together, through Photoshop. That's the beauty of it, because you cannot shoot this many people in one shot. It just doesn't work.
And choosing the costumes, choosing a multi-generational kind of cadre of individuals that become a group. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, because this speaks to production. Okay, I mean, yes, it's a photograph, but I call it the 60th of a second photograph, right? It's all the production that I had to put into it beforehand in order to get to that 60th of a second. You see what I'm saying? Like getting costumes. Some of the costumes are like from Hamilton. They had to be rented. The table had to be reconfigured. I was fortunate enough to have the location. But everything had to, you had to put your hand on everything for this photograph. And yeah, I mean, as well as it conceptually saying what it's saying, but I think it also speaks to a certain degree of professionalism
Right.
in
So,
terms of craft.
right.
Yeah.
So, and the very, very last slide that I had was your friend, Essex Hemphill, who said, "I love myself enough to be who I am." And I really wanted to thank both of you for being who you are. It's been, I feel like we didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg. It's so rich, both your art and your conversation.
Well, thank you so much again, Gannit.
Yeah.
And thank you, Renee. I look forward to seeing you
Yeah.
soon, and wishing you both a wonderful evening. And thanks to the audience who are here. So
Thank
enjoy.
you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.